Okay, a few months ago, I did a review and an analysis of the Creative Aurvana Ace Mimi, which I have here. And in that review, I talked mainly about their Mimi feature, which has the hearing test and allows you to customize the sound for your hearing. I really wanted to understand how that worked in comparison to some of the other options on the market that have hearing tests that say that they'll customize sound for you. And I came away pretty happy with these earphones overall. The other feature that they had that I had wanted to try was their xMEMS drivers, which are supposed to be much more detailed and better at higher end frequencies. And I liked the sound of these. I found myself listening to them and using them a lot more often than some of the others that I had in my collection. I found them to be a little bassy, but acceptable for consumer level headphones in this environment we live in where everybody likes, kind of that V shape where you've got the elevated bass and the elevated treble, and then the mids are somewhere in the middle. And you can customize these. You can take the hearing test and get your personalization, but it has EQ features, and I liked them quite a bit. I don't really like this style of headphone. If you've kind of followed me, I'm not a huge fan of stems. I really prefer the little bud style, like the Galaxy Buds Pro 2, or even the Pixel Buds. I prefer that style, but I do recognize that stems allow you to have usually better microphone performance, and sometimes, depending on how they're balanced, potentially better stability, but definitely better microphone performance. So I don't like the way the stems look, but I appreciate what they can bring to the table. Well, at the time that I reviewed these, the concept of xMEMS drivers in consumer grade audio products was kind of new. This was the second product that Creative had come out with xMEMS drivers, but the first one with Mimi, which is really the feature that I wanted to try out here. But not too long ago, I discovered that there was another product that came out around the same time as these, or the ones that preceded these, that also had xMEMS drivers. And I thought, I have to do a comparison. And what are those products? Well, you may have seen reviews around the web of the Capsule Pro Plus 3. Oh my goodness, what is this name? Capsule 3 Pro Plus from Soundpeats. And these are very similar in a variety of ways to the Aurvana Ace Mimi. They both have LDAC for that high-res audio feature. They are very similar in shape. The cases are even very similar. Some of the rating here is very similar. The battery life is similar. The drivers, they both have those xMEMS drivers along with a dynamic. And they really look similar. Just showed you the Aurvanas. Well, this is the Capsule 3 Pro Plus, and you can see there's a lot of similarities here. Now, these have been around for a while, so you can find reviews of these on YouTube, but I didn't really see a lot of reviews comparing these two, which I thought was strange, because xMEMS v xMEMS, you think that would be something that somebody would want to really do a deep dive on, right? But these cases are extremely similar. The main difference is just in how they're branded, right? You've got Soundpeats logo here. You've got this lovely "Hear Your Inspiration." I think that's what that says here on the front, that everybody loves so much. I don't care really, but I was really struck when I got the Capsule 3 Pros that they are so similar. Even with the USB on the bottom and if you turn them in the same direction, you can see they've got the buttons on the same side for reset. They're just very similar, right? The bodies are very similar. They're both that stem style with that, long stem. The bodies are shaped a little bit different, but very, very similar. The coloring, is a little bit different. The previous version of the Aurvanas with the xMEMS drivers, I think, have this more gold coloring to them. So they may be kind of channeling after that coloring, as opposed to these Ace Mimis, which are a little bit more understated with the blue and just the tiny bit of coloring accents, and then the branding here on the stems. But They are super similar. They feel the same in my ears. So if you find one comfortable, you'll probably find the other comfortable. So yeah, they're remarkably similar in their features. I think probably the biggest difference is I don't see an IPX rating on the box for the Soundpeats. The Creatives are IPX5, so you could wear them, working out or get them a little bit wet in the rain. The price difference, I think, between the two is the Capsule 3 Pro Plus come in just under $90. I think with tax I paid like $87 for them. And the Aurvana Ace Mimi on Creative's website are $130. I didn't see them on Amazon.com. You can get the version without Mimi for about the same price as these. So really the difference between these two is the Mimi feature, which I'm sure Creative had to pay for because that's licensing from another company. But the Capsule 3 Pro Plus, I'm never going to get that name right, do have their own customization feature built into them. It's not as full featured as Mimi. It's not, I wouldn't call it a real hearing test, but it does go through different frequencies, testing both your ears at the same time to see, do you need any particular frequencies boosted or adjusted based off of your hearing, because we know as we age, we tend to lose the higher frequencies. So it does at least have that. So when I tested both of these and I compared them, listening to them, I have them both in their customized preference EQ setting, so that theoretically, if they're personalized for me, then the frequency response based off of my hearing and my preferences should be pretty similar, right? In actuality, I find that these do sound pretty similar. And when I first started listening to them, I'm like, oh, they're like the same thing. But as I listened to them a little bit more, I realized that there are a couple of key differences. So just as earbuds, I talked about how the IPX rating on the Aurvana is IPX5, and I didn't see one for the Capsule 3 Pro Plus. The battery life is pretty similar. I think one is rated for 7 hours without ANC, and the other one's rated for 7.5. The cases have similar size batteries in them for recharging. The Mimis have Qi wireless charging, which I love because I do have a couple of Qi wireless chargers around my house, and I can just kind of slap them on there. These don't have that. If that's not important to you, that's not a big deal. Really, to me, I think here, because they both have the xMEMS drivers, it's less of a competition of, how much better is ANC on one than the other, because they're pretty close. I would probably give the edge in ANC to the Soundpeats, but they're pretty close. I do find that I have a little bit more white noise just in the background, not listening to anything with the Aurvanas, which I think give the impression of less impressive ANC, if that makes any sense. But I think that what they cancel out in noise, especially in like low volume settings like office or home, they both will drown out the sound of fans and air conditioners and heaters. They both handle that pretty well. I wouldn't go for this category of earbud if you're looking for pristine noise canceling. I'd probably go up a level and focus more on something like what Sony and Bose put out. But I do think that for your average situation, again, a home or office, that I think the ANC on both of these is reasonable, and the controls are very similar. You can control pretty much everything, your play, pause. This one even allows you to mute microphone. They both allow you to control volume. You have the ability to customize the controls with the Aurvana. I didn't see a way to customize them here, but you are able to control most of the things that I think people want to control. So for me, I think when you're thinking about the drivers that are in them, it's really, how do they sound? So let's get back to that. So I talked about how there's a little bit more of a noise floor with the Aurvana on ANC, and I listened to both of these in ANC just to drown out the sound of my surroundings. And there's not a lot of sound, but I want to make sure that I'm hearing the music. And I know ANC sometimes colors, especially with bass, it can sometimes pump up the bass. So keep that in mind. I'm listening to both of these with ANC on, and I'm listening to both of these with LDAC turned on, which means I'm not using multi-point for either one of these. I have them both paired to different devices, but I'm using Android devices, Android Samsung devices on both with the same app. So either I'm using Qobuz on both. If I'm streaming, I'm using Samsung Music on both. If I'm listening to tracks on the device, if I'm listening to YouTube, whatever the case may be, I'm listening to them on very similar hardware. If I take out the idea of there being a higher noise floor with the Aurvana, again, like I said, I think they sound very similar if you're not thinking about it. In fact, if you're buying just based off of sound from xMEMS drivers, I would tell you to get the Soundpeats, because I don't think that paying more, if you're just interested in sound, I don't think paying more for the Mimi feature is necessarily worth it, because you do have EQ features outside of Mimi, and I would probably go down a level if you just want the xMEMS drivers and get the Ace 2, I believe, that are below this, and they're comparable in price. If that's really all you're interested in, you really go for the Ace Mimi because of the Mimi. But because these are the two that I have, I do think that there is a difference in the sound. And I listen to music a lot, and the same songs and different songs. And one of the things that really struck me right away is, I'm going to call it presence. Some people may call it soundstage. Some people may call it, the sound or the size of a room. A lot of this stuff feels artificial to me when we talk about soundstage, when you're dealing with earphones or closed back headphones. The feeling of soundstage to me, and I have thought this for years, and I just think I'm probably weird because I'm the only person I've ever heard talk about it like this, but it just, whenever we talk about soundstage being wide or open or spacious, that feels artificial to me. Now, keeping that in mind, I do think that the Aurvana Ace Mimi provide more of that space. If you think about sometimes spatial audio, what it really seems to kind of do a lot of times, and I think this is where the artificial feeling comes from, is it kind of pushes the music away from you a little bit. I don't know exactly, what the mechanics are of them doing that, but I don't always want that, right? Sometimes I do just want the feeling of the music just being there. Sometimes, especially if you're listening to live music, then yes, that feeling of, I'm out in an auditorium or I'm in a concert hall, I could see where that would be really beneficial. But a lot of the music I'm listening to is not, live recorded, in a big sound stage or, a concert hall. It's just music recorded in a studio for the most part. I do have some live albums that I enjoy. But for just your average studio music, I find that feeling artificial. And I don't get that here with this at all. So if you're a person who really values that feeling of soundstage being open and feeling like the instruments are, floating in space, so to speak, around you, I don't think you get that here. You get more of that with the Ace Mimis. But when I listened back and forth, it just ended up feeling artificial to me. But if that's what you like, definitely go with these, because they're just better at that, putting things in space. Now, even as I say that, I do find that being able to isolate instruments, even though if they don't feel like they're open and wide in the same kind of way, if I'm listening to, like, for example, I love the Funky Knuckles, a jazz band that has, horns and guitar and keyboard and bass and drums. And with these, I could separate the horns. There's a trumpet player and a sax player, and the trumpet and the sax are separated. They don't mush into each other as much as they do here. And I don't say that to say that this makes music sound mushy or it collapses everything together, because it doesn't. I just noticed better separation here with this. Even though these feel more like they're in a space, these feel more like I can tell them apart, if that makes any sense. So I noticed that pretty quickly. And then I also noticed that there's a little bit more dynamic. I'm going to call it a little bit more of a dynamic sound with these. It's probably more of that consumer, what I was talking about with the V shape, where you've got the treble and the bass, but it's more articulate. And I know, what does that mean? There's more texture to the sound with the Soundpeats. So if I'm listening to guitar, there's more nuance in the sounds of the string. If I'm listening to, acoustic piano, the sound of the keys being struck or the strings being plucked, it's more present with the Soundpeats than it was with the Ace Mimi. Now, again, a lot of this is going to depend on recordings, because you're not going to be able to pick a lot of this stuff out with your average low quality MP3. I'm listening to FLAC files for the most part, or I'm streaming FLAC files from Qobuz. So the ability to get a little bit more detail out of the sound is there. I don't know that if you're just listening to like Spotify or YouTube Music or even Apple Music, that it matters. I'm not even sure that it matters for Tidal or Qobuz, even though they stream at high res. I think you really only benefit from this extra level of detail when you're listening to your own high res FLAC files or WAV files, lossless files on your device. Then I think when you have all of that information there to be heard, you can hear it. I don't know how many people do that anymore. Especially if you're not an audiophile. If you're just a consumer person and you want to be able to listen to music at work, at home, at the gym, on the bus, on the train, on the plane, especially if you're in a place with noise, you're not going to hear that detailed difference. You really need to be wanting that higher level of detail, probably when you're in a quiet place at home. And I'm going to argue, if you're in a quiet place at home and you want to hear that detail, don't go wireless. Don't go Bluetooth. Get yourself some wired IEMs. Get yourself some wired headphones, closed back or open back. But I get it. The convenience, right? You just take them out the case, plunk them in your ears. I do think if you care about that, you will hear a difference here. Now, I'm going to say that again and say that it really depends on how much you value that sense of openness and space, because I just don't think you get that here. I think the music will feel like it's in your head. And if you don't like that, it's going to sound good in your head. Don't get me wrong. You're going to hear really nice detail, but it's not going to feel like you're sitting in a little concert hall. It's not going to feel like it's not going to feel like that. I just don't get that from these. I get a little bit more of that. And I actually went back to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. I pulled out my Technics AZ80s. I pulled out my Galaxy Buds Pro 3. And they all offer more of that sensation of openness and space than these do. But what I like about that is it gives me a more intimate ability to hear those details. Like, I feel sometimes like the space, is it just noise? Is it just me? Am I the only person who feels this way? Sometimes I feel like that extra, I'm going to call it noise, and I'm probably going to get hate for calling it noise, but that extra noise takes away from the detail and the instruments and the sounds and the voices. But again, if I'm just listening to music, I'm not even noticing that. I'm not even thinking about that. I had to sit down and really force myself to listen before I even realized what differences I was hearing, and then process those differences. So again, if you're not a person who's going to do that, if you're not a person who's ever done that, I don't know that it matters. But I can tell you that for an intimate feel that's largely in your head with really nice detail, really nice texture, I think these are a great buy at about $90, because I've listened to earphones, wireless earphones, much more expensive than these that don't sound good. And that lines up with a lot of the reviews you'll see for these on YouTube. People like these, and I understand why they sound good. If you're a person who really likes that openness, though, or you just want the Ace Mimi, and I don't blame you, I bought them because of the Mimi feature, then I would say buy the Aurvanas. If you're looking at 90 versus 130, yes, there's a price difference. But if you want that extra feature, it's worth it to you, right? And if you want Qi wireless charging, that's worth it to you, right? So it's, what do you want? But sound to sound, I actually prefer the sound of these. but I don't dislike the sound of these. So it's really, what do you want from your sound? What matters to you? I think they're both great. I think it's awesome that we're seeing new drivers and we're seeing new innovations. And for anyone who's interested in shopping both of these, I hope that helps you. You might need to buy both of them and compare them. And just know that you're really going to have to pay attention and think about what matters more to you. Is it the detail? Is it that sense of space? But that's it. That's what I have to say about the Soundpeats Capsule 3 Pro Plus. My goodness. And the Creative Aurvana Ace Mimi. We really need to get back to like one named products, don't you think? Anyway, that's what I got. Thanks for watching. This is an audio recording using Creative Aurvana Ace Mimi, a Bluetooth headset. I am in a quiet room. The heat is running in the background. Again, this is an audio test, microphone test of the Creative Aurvana Ace Mimi. This is an audio recording test using the Soundpeats Capsule 3 Pro Plus, using my Samsung Galaxy Tab Active 5. Again, this is the Soundpeats Capsule 3 Pro Plus. These are a stem style earbud with xMEMS drivers, and they are high-res wireless certified. Soundpeats Capsule 3 Pro Plus.